Welcome to The Right Atmosphere, a podcast for writers brought to you by Atmosphere Press, the only publisher that puts rewarding and meaningful author experiences above all else. I'm your host, Hayla Alawi. On this episode, we'll be tackling the question of what makes the perfect book manuscript with our special guest, Dr. Kyle McCord. Kyle is the author of 7 books, including National Poetry Series finalist Magpies in the Valley of Oleanders and the novel Reunion of the Good Weather Suicide Cult. He has work featured or forthcoming in Boston Review, the Harvard Review, the Kenyon Review, Plowshares, Tri-Quarterly, and elsewhere. He's received grants and awards from the Academy of American Poets, Vermont Studio Center, and the Baltic Writing Residency. Kyle holds an MFA from University of Massachusetts Amherst and a PhD from the University of North Texas. He served as associate poetry editor of The Nation and currently serves as executive editor of Goldwake Press and acquisitions director for Atmosphere Press. Kyle's role as Atmosphere's acquisitions director is what makes him the perfect person to speak on what he's looking for in the perfect manuscript. So, thank you so much for joining me, Kyle.
Pleasure.
Yes. So the big question that we want to hear from you today, as an acquisitions director, what is it that you're looking for in the perfect manuscript?
Sure. So, first of all, I think it's worth talking a little bit about the differences between sitting as the person submitting a manuscript and the person reading a manuscript. And I think understanding those differences might give us a very clear sense of the best way that we as authors can package manuscripts, present manuscripts, and ultimately create the kind of relationship that is going to encourage editors to want to publish the work. Okay. So before I was ever an editor, right, I was an author. I was someone who would go on Submittable or would go to other, submission systems and be like, okay, send these poems out, send these poems out, send these poems out. Um, and one thing to say in advance is, when you approach that sort of precipice, remember that we're coming in very much with the idea that um, there's relatively low a likelihood that someone will accept your manuscript. That is sort of the reality of publication. But a lot of times, what you're doing is you are starting to develop relationships with readers in the world who run magazines and publications, right? And so, when we are thinking about what would constitute just an absolutely ideal submission, first of all, generally, we would love to have some sort of information about the writer. As an editor, we would like to know a little bit about who the writer is, not even just, the bibliography of everything they've published, because that tells us some things, but it doesn't tell us everything. And so in your cover letter, I would say there's 3 things you want to focus on. Brevity. Okay. So generally, if you have a very long cover letter, people will tend not to read it. 2, I think that you want to lean towards being as, let's put it this way, letting the work speak for itself. I think a lot of people, when they approach the cover letter, are like, let me tell you everything about the manuscript. It's like, well, I got good news. I got the manuscript, so I can take a look at it, and you don't have to explain everything to me. And then thirdly, I think you really want to focus in on um, providing, sort of a subtle case for the publication of your manuscript, meaning that you want to say, okay, well, um, here's why this might be a good fit, right? In order to do that, you will need to know a little bit about the press itself. And so that means doing a touch of background research to find out, just who is on the editorial staff, what other work they publish. And again, you don't have to read every book in the catalog, but you definitely want to have a sense of who your publisher is, because otherwise, conceivably, you're just, throwing darts at a board to kind of see what happens, right? So first of all, to go back to it, we're going to have a cover letter, and the cover letter is going to possess those three qualities. It's going to be relatively brief. It is going to provide some extra information, and it's going to make a subtle case for itself. Okay. Secondly, the ideal submission, and notice I've used the word ideal because one of the things I would avoid is the idea that there is necessarily an archetype for the perfect manuscript. In that, um, once something has been done in the world of the creative arts, it of course is the case that we don't want to just replicate that. If you put together, say, a Dickens novel and send it out, well, people aren't going to publish it not because it's not good, but because Dickens already wrote it, right? And so, what we want to do is we want to think about it. I would say there are three qualities to really look for in your manuscript. And these are things that we can cultivate. When you review and edit your manuscript, you can watch for them. The first is novelty. Is there something about your manuscript that is going to differentiate it so that it looks qualitatively different from other manuscripts that are out there? Again, that can be maybe the nature of the project. Maybe it has to do with the kinds of characters you're creating. Maybe the art, maybe you've deviated from the archetype in a really interesting way. That's not to say you can't write within genre. You absolutely can. In fact, I quite enjoy genre fiction. But we also want to be conscious of the tropes and conventions of those types of writing. And we don't want to just fall into them. We want to intelligently engage with the conventions of the genre that we're in. Okay. So some kind of novelty. Number two, fundamental craftsmanship, right? So craftsmanship has to do with as I read through a manuscript, am I like, oh, this person understands how to include dialogue that really cuts to the core of what is actually going on, right? Rather than just maybe something where we have a lot of introduction material, we have scenes that drag on a little bit. If it's poetry, is it clear that this is someone who has other contemporary writers in mind who they're engaging with, and whose work is, that if it's memoir, is there a clear structure to it where we've filtered through to the core experience that we want to provide to the reader? If it is children's literature, there's lots of ways that children's literature can get derailed if it is not, if we don't write with our audience in mind, right? And not only our audience, but also who we want to be in regard to our audience. So we absolutely want to be, again, conscious of those kind of craftsmanship decisions. So something that we, to go to the idea of an ideal, something that is quite novel, right, or inventive in some capacity. Secondly, we are looking for something that is aware of the conventions and also is engaging with them in intelligent ways, and the craftsmanship of the manuscript is generally strong. Thirdly, um, I would say that general, how shall I put it? Um, the manuscript, this is something that's very difficult to replicate. And it's the reason that you can't have like just a purely AI written uh, submission, if in case that was ever something you were thinking about, is that there's a quality of humanness, right? Where I think that a lot of times books that miss on this are books that try to be really hard boiled or really explosive or really whatever. If your book has characters who don't seem very human, or who are in some way kind of like caricatures, it's going to be very hard to engage with that. If you have a memoir and you don't get particularly personal in the course of it, which a lot of memoirs don't, that is a place where the manuscript will not probably be as engaging as it should be. Um, if you have poems, but the poems seem to be about something distant, it's one of the reasons that a lot of political poetry kind of doesn't come together is because it's more didactic than it is intelligent. And so I think what we want to do is look for those qualities of humanness and openness that really invite people to a text that maybe make people go, oh, there's like an author behind this, right? So the three qualities I would highlight again, first is this kind of humanness to it, to a text, knowledge and application of conventions, again, quality of craftsmanship, and then thirdly, novelty. I think those are the three things that really at their core optimally are going to sell a book, and along with a well-written cover letter, are going to position you the best they possibly can to really put something great into the world and to make a compelling case for yourself as a writer and for the text itself.
Yeah, okay. That was a lot of really great advice in a really small amount of time. So thanks so much for sharing that. I really especially liked the points about novelty, even when you're working within genre or tropes that you want to use, but being kind of self-aware about it, I guess. And also the humanness thing, especially when everyone's thinking about and talking about AI. Um, I mean, everyone's also talking about that element of humanness in art, but it you can really feel it. So, especially out of everything you said, those two things really stuck with me. Before we say goodbye to our guest, I'm happy to say that this podcast is brought to you by Atmosphere Press, the only publisher that puts rewarding and meaningful author experiences above all else. Founded in 2015 by an author and PhD in literature and devoted to serving authors through editorial, design, publication, and promotion, Atmosphere has sold tens of thousands of copies of our authors' books across 6 continents. Visit atmospherepress.com to sign up for Atmosphere's newsletter, The Launchpad, and to learn more about submission opportunities, event news, and book, publicity, and writing residency giveaways. So, last thing for you, Kyle, where should our listeners go to learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, what you should go do is I have a personal website, but what I would recommend is going and checking out the Atmosphere website. They have plenty of information about me and what I do. And also, a cool thing can happen, which is I mentioned that you can start creating audiences by submitting your work, and you can create an audience of Kyle immediately or very quickly. In that, I don't get to read everything that comes through, but I do get, the manuscripts that are passed along to me, which is always exciting. And so I would love to read your work, see what you're doing, and find out a little bit more about you as an author.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kyle. That was a really great interview. We learned so much from you. So thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you.
Mhm. And thank you so much to everyone for tuning in to this episode of The Right Atmosphere, the Advice for Writers podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review and share our podcast with the writers in your life. And if you're ready to take the next step in your publishing journey, you can visit atmospherepress.com to submit your manuscript for publication consideration or to learn more about writing and what we do. I'm Hayla Alawi. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.